The first Lost Belt 3 banner will likely be dropping very soon, and Landling isn't the only cutie appearing on it. Hello everyone, Soberoni of G&A Reviews here, with a servant spotlight for yet another servant who keeps up the proud tradition of all female lancers having a perfect thigh game, Qin Liangyu. We'll be examining her stats and skills, as well as going over pointers on how to utilize her effectively and an overall grade, comparing her to how she stacks up to the other 4-star servants. Now, onto Liangyu's stats. Liangyu has a max HP of 13,387 and a max attack of 8,295, which becomes 8,709 due to her Lancer class modifier. Liangyu has the second highest HP stat among all 4-star Lancers. However, predictably, her attack ranks near the bottom. Things don't change much for her when compared to the other 4-star servants overall, as she retains one of the highest HP stats in her rarity, but fairly low attack. Aside from her attack and HP stats, Liangyu sports an NP gain rate of 0.79% and a star rate of 12.1%. This translates into slightly above average NP gain despite the low hit counts on her arts card because of high hit counts on her quick cards, and she has very good star generating for the same reason. Liangyu's stat spread makes her very tanky and utility based. Taking a look at her skills, her first skill is White Shaft Spear, rank B. This increases her own quick card and arts card effectiveness for 3 turns between 10 and 20%, and it also increases her crit damage for 3 turns between 20 and 30%, all depending on level. Her second skill is Aspect of the Fateful Soldier, rank B. This increases her critical star absorption rate for 1 turn between 300 and 600%. It also grants her buff removal resistance for 3 times or 3 turns between 50 and 100%, both depending on level. And finally, it grants her debuff immunity for 3 times or 3 turns. And her last skill is Banditry Abolisher, rank B. This charges her NP gauge between 10 to 20% depending on level, and it also grants her a 2 times Guts that lasts for 3 turns, reviving her with 1 HP. Liangyu only has 1 passive, and that's Magic Resistance, rank C. It increases her own debuff resist by 15%. Moving on to her deck and Noble Phantasm, Liangyu has an Arts Quick deck with Quick, Arts Buster, and an Arts Noble Phantasm. For her hit counts, she has 4 hits on her Quick card, 2 hits on her Arts, 3 hits on her Buster, and 4 hits on her Extra card. Her Noble Phantasm is Shangzhen Emperor's 4 Poems. This applies a number of buffs onto Liangyu. It allows her to inflict defense down by 10% for 3 turns on enemies when she's attacking with her normal attack. It also allows her to remove enemy buffs when she crits enemies for 3 times or 5 turns. It reduces the enemy's crit damage by 10% for 3 turns whenever she takes normal attack damage from them. And it increases her attack for 3 turns between 30 and 50% depending on level. It also recovers the party's HP when she takes a crit attack between 2,000 and 4,000 depending on overcharge. When it comes to her ascensions, Liangyu requires a pretty wide range of ascension mats for leveling. For her ascension, she needs 8 Yggdrasil Seeds, 7 Snake Jewels, 11 Phoenix Plumes, and 6 Chaos Talons. Yggdrasil Seeds can be farmed at the Quiet Forest in Salem, where they have a 49% drop rate. Snake Jewels are found at the Chasm in the Earth at Agartha, with a 39% drop rate. Phoenix Plumes have a 35% drop rate at the Town Hall in Salem, and Chaos Talons are best farmed at Des Moines in America, where they have a 20% drop rate. For her skills, Liangyu requires 11 Snake Jewels, 15 Yggdrasil Seeds, 20 Aurora Steel, and 20 Tranquil Bells per skill. Aurora Steel has a 39% drop rate at the Castle of Ice and Snow in Lost Belt 2, and Tranquil Bells are a new ascension material that will be farmable at the 8 Gates Cave in Lost Belt 3, where they have a 39% drop rate. Other than the fact that her thighs look strong enough to crush watermelons with, Liangyu is not your average Lancer. She is much more tanky and utility based than most other servants in her class, and that much is evident just from her stats. She sacrifices her attack in favor of some very good HP and P gain and star generating. But that isn't to say that Liangyu is completely lacking in offensive tools. She has her first skill, White Shaft Spear, to rely on for her damage needs. This skill buffs her quick and arch card effectiveness by 20% and her crit damage by 30%, for 3 turns. On their own, these are not very high buff numbers, but thanks to the skill's low cooldown, they can remain active for long periods of time. And in addition to the moderate damage boost that the skill provides, the arts and quick buffs can also help improve her already good star generating and NP gain. The crit damage buff also plays in important role in her kit, as Liangyu's playstyle is highly crit oriented, a fact made much more clear by her second skill, Aspect of a Faithful Soldier. This skill increases Liangyu's Star Absorb significantly, and it also provides her good protection in the form of debuff immunity and buff removal resistance for 3 turns or 3 instances. Unfortunately, the Star Absorb only lasts a single turn, but on the bright side, this skill also has a short cooldown, making it easy to use multiple times in a battle. And the Star Absorb is strong enough to consistently set her up for some high burst damage turns if it's timed correctly. The debuff immunity is also very strong for boss fights and challenge quests because it lasts for so long, which means that Liangyu rarely ever has to worry about debilitating debuffs stopping her from snowballing. In addition, the buff removal resist is a newer type of buff that makes it harder for enemies to remove her buffs. Something of particular interest to Liangyu because most of her power comes from stacking buffs. Finally, Liangyu has good survivability in her third skill, Banditry Abolisher. This skill gives her a Guts effect that can trigger twice, and it also charges her NP by 20%. The Guts is quite strong since it can revive Liangyu twice, making it especially good for soloing. However, the window of activation is very small at only 3 turns, and it only revives her with 1 HP. The NP charge is also nice to have as well, because Liangyu is a servant who wants to spam out her NP as much as possible. Unfortunately though, this skill has a tremendously long cooldown, so don't expect to use it more than once in most battles. For skill priority, level White Spear first because it provides a good damage buff and it enables her to better NP spam and feed herself crit stars, followed by her Star Absorb second for more consistent crit damage, and then finally her Guts last because the cooldown is just so long. Liangyu's Noble Phantasm is an arts buff that does a whole lot of stuff. It applies defense down to her attacks, it also allows her to remove enemy buffs when she crits, it reduces enemy crit damage when she's hit by them, and it heals the party whenever she is hit by an enemy crit. It also buffs her attack. At first glance, this Noble Phantasm may look a little confusing and hard to understand because it is. But to put it simply, it grants Liangyu a bunch of buffs and debuffs depending on how she hits enemies and how enemies hit her. A few of these effects are very powerful. With this Noble Phantasm, Liangyu can stack up to 30% defense down on an enemy, as well as remove their buffs whenever she crits them. And the sizable buff to her attack can help make up for her poor stats. On the downside though, reducing enemy crit damage on hit isn't that powerful, and while being able to heal the party for 2000 HP is good, it only happens whenever she gets crit, which is something that you as a player have no control over. It is worth mentioning that these buffs can of course be stacked, so much like Hozuin, much of Liangyu's power comes from stacking her NP buffs by spamming her Noble Phantasm. Crits are also important for Liangyu because with her Noble Phantasm buff active, she can remove all of an enemy's buffs every time she crits. That's something invaluable for challenge quests, and she can set this up easily with her second skill. Between her star generating, her defense down, and her ability to heal the party and remove enemy buffs, Liangyu can provide tremendous utility to teams. With enough Noble Phantasm stacks and stars, she can also make a solid crit DPS. But while Liangyu may seem like a 4-star Hozuin on the outside, she does have one fatal flaw, and that's that most of her NP buffs have severe restrictions. Aside from her attack buff, she can only activate each of her Noble Phantasm effects 3 times before the buff just goes away, which hampers her snowballing capability. Additionally, having conditions like needing to be crit by an enemy or needing to crit an enemy make her utility very inconsistent and difficult to plan around. Another flaw of hers is that she simply lacks the buffs necessary to be as strong as most other crit servants. The 30% attack buff is nice, especially if you can stack it, but it's not enough to make up for the lack of an offensive Noble Phantasm. And her crit damage buff is only 30%, which is laughably bad compared to most crit servants. So while Liangyu's kit is very diverse, it's also highly conditional and thus inconsistent, and it can be very hard to use her without perfect setup. Team comp is very important for Liangyu because she lacks strong buffs and consistency on her own. Therefore, you want to pair her with art servants who can increase her NP gain so that she can more easily stack buffs and take advantage of the utility on her Noble Phantasm. Servants like Lanling, Tamamo, and Paracelsus can be perfect for this. Lanling provides a high uptime arts buff and NP charge to keep Liangyu's Noble Phantasm gauge topped off. Tamamo also provides a strong art steroid and can charge Liangyu's Noble Phantasm gauge with her own NP. And Paracelsus just makes for the best free-to-play arts battery thanks to his strong NP gain buff and his arts buff. Because Liangyu lacks an offensive Noble Phantasm, most of her damage is going to come from crits. So to that extent, allies who can provide stars and buff her crit damage are invaluable. Servants like Castergil, Mozart, and Chiron. Castergil and Mozart are excellent at setting up Liangyu with plenty of stars for a turn or two so that she can maximize her damage. And they can also buff her arts as well. Chiron likewise has a card buff that Liangyu can make use of, and he provides one of the best crit damage steroids in the game. Liangyu's Bondcraft Essence is Ashleaf Maple Wood. It increases the party's arts and quick card effectiveness by 10%. This is actually a pretty good craft essence if you're using Liangyu as more of a support instead of your main DPS. If you want to take full advantage of her utility, then I highly recommend using CEs that can help her with star generating and providing NP gain, like 2030, Painting Summer, Chocolatier, and Magical Girl of Sapphire. If you're going the more pure DPS route instead, then I highly recommend building crit damage with craft essences like Gem Magecraft, Another Ending, Heading Towards Treefoss, or Talk on the Hot Sands. In the future, you should be on the lookout for Annual General Meeting, which comes out for the Case Files collab next April. It generates 3 stars per turn, and it also increases arts card effectiveness and NP gain, so it complements Liangyu's utility perfectly. As for command codes, I suggest using Gakyo no Ofude because it buffs arts card crit damage by 20%, and crit damage is something that Liangyu desperately needs. It'll be out next summer. All in all, Liangyu is a very unique servant that plays significantly different from most other Lancers. She can provide the team with good support in the form of star generating, a stackable defense down, and buff removal. Her high HP and good gut skill make her very tanky and quite strong for soloing, and if she's able to Noble Phantasm spam, she can be a pretty good DPS. However, she does suffer from inconsistency due to the restrictions and conditions on her Noble Phantasm buffs. Her buffs are far too weak to make up for her own lack of an offensive Noble Phantasm, especially her crit buff, and the utility that she does offer can usually be found in other more dedicated supports who are much more consistent. So Liangyu's overall grade for me is a B-. Although Liangyu is one of those servants who's very difficult to grade because her usability and power fluctuate dramatically depending on her NP level and the supports that she has around her. She can be a beast if you put her in a team with Tamamo and Castergil and you have good card RNG, for example, but she can be massively underwhelming if you don't have any good art supports or if you have bad card RNG. Overall, I think Liangyu is in need of buffs that can make her Noble Phantasm spam more consistent and her Noble Phantasm buffs less awkward. And those are my thoughts on Liangyu. If you're still considering rolling for her, then I can say she is without a doubt one of the most fun servants to use and experiment with. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you haven't already, please do check out the spotlights that I have for the other new Lost Belt 3 servants, linked both on screen right now and in the description down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you really enjoyed the video. Join the party over at our Discord, chill with us on Twitch, and follow us on Twitter. And I'll see you all in the next servant spotlight. Soberoni out. Later.